Greetings, programs. What is good? Hope you're all doing well. Alrighty then. This is Stella Jimenez, also known as the Breakfast of Champions, obviously. And today I thought I'd do something completely different. I'm going to share my thoughts on the PS5 reveal presentation that happened not so long ago. But before I do, please remember the cardinal rule of truck driving. You gotta back up before you unload on that like button. And please consider subscribing for more gaming content complete with tips and tricks, as well as any news in the gaming world in general. Smash that like button for me, please. It would really help me out a ton. Okay, so lots of us are on the edge of our seats because the next generation of consoles are finally on their way. I really enjoyed the PS5 reveal presentation, with one exception, as I'm sure most of you did. Why didn't they reveal the price? Especially now with the highly insane depression level era employment and the current general state of affairs, the price now more than ever is of paramount importance. Never has Steve Jobs been more missed than now. Firstly, I believe Apple's launch of a gaming system would have been way more successful, and also they would have revealed the price. Try to imagine back to the very first iPhone reveal. They dropped the price. Or go way back to where Super Bowl commercials began in the 80s with the now iconic and historic Apple Computer 1984 themed Super Bowl ad of, 1984. And yeah, they obviously revealed the price back then too. Isn't that the main reason for having them reveal? To let the customer base know exactly how much the thing is going to cost? I've never taken a single solitary business class, but I kind of think that would be a concept they may want to look into. And maybe we'll discuss in a later video the whole craziness behind the Apple Computer ad of 1984, which set the bar for every commercial that came after that, especially Super Bowl commercials. As for me, I'm excited to hear what channels like Cinemassacre, Metal Jesus Rocks, John Hancock, or any plethora of the gamers out there who have experienced the entirety of gaming from the early days of the Atari until now think about this. They may be able to bring slightly more weight to the conversation and know a little more about what this PS5 reveal actually brought forth by being far better able to dissect and discern what Sony actually wants us to know from what we think they're trying to tell us. This is just wild speculation, but my guess is the reason they didn't drop the price is because they're testing the waters to see, first of all, how many of us are interested in it, and second of all, they're probably waiting to choose their moment. This might mean it could be expensive. When the PS3 dropped, it was touted as having the fastest processor in consoles at that time. In fact, SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, even released an app that would run in the background which took full advantage of the processor speed to crunch numbers while it wasn't being used. Unfortunately, the app is no longer available. The PS5 will also be launched with the speed of a professional gaming PC, with one advantage. There are millions of different custom gaming PC setups, depending on whose computer we're looking at. Each PS5 will be identical software-wise, which means Sony can optimize their games across the entire community. Back in the day, I went from my NES straight to PS1, and shortly thereafter PS2. I've also always been a proud Apple customer, so I never really got into the whole Microsoft side of gaming with PC and or Xbox. As a kid, my dad had a computer that he used for his business, and I can remember playing Sierra's finest like Space Quest or King's Quest, but after an incident where I almost deleted the entire computer, I was told to stick to consoles from then on. Normally, I wouldn't be sharing my feelings without actually having at least played the thing first, but there are a few huge game drops, the most exciting of which for me is Gran Turismo 7, and the fact that the GTA franchise will be making a comeback. I've never really been into sports games, so the reveal of the basketball and golf, although they look stunning, for me it's not while I'll be purchasing the system. Other than that, the price, obviously, the next most important question on my mind is, will it be finally able to play hard copies of both PS1 and PS2 games? Every PlayStation system that has come out is able to play PlayStation 1, but none of them are able to play PlayStation 2 games. So the fact that the PS5 may be a bit bigger than the PS4, or that it may come in different color schemes like full black or pink or camouflage or what have you, doesn't affect me at the moment. I could care less about that right now. I'm sure each gaming franchise will eventually release individually themed systems to reflect their own games. I understand some people who may be newer to gaming do not collect physical copies, which I think is very interesting and I'll discuss in a bit. But for people my age who have been doing this for several decades and have basements full to the brim with games spanning an era dating back to the early 1970s, which is basically 6 decades, isn't that the entire point? To have that physical copy, the smell of the brand new plastic, complete with all of the little nuances and innuendos like the cover art, instruction manual, and yes, the actual disc, or floppy, or cartridge, or what have you. As our PS2s get older and older, it would be nice to be able to enjoy our classic games on this system without having to use the older systems themselves, for which there is very limited hardware support. A USB stick or external hard drive loaded to the brim with games won't be worth a fraction as much in the future, because all you get when you buy an online game is the game data and a cutesy little graphic icon when you hover over the game on the main menu screen. Let's continue that debate in the comments. Do you prefer physical copies, digital only, or both? Maybe avid collectors will probably buy a physical copy, which they will never open, as well as a digital copy, which has no moving parts that they will actually play. Yes, the regret of throwing away most of my Atari and Nintendo boxes as a kid. I admit, I'm one of those guys. But who knew? Of course, not everyone can afford or justify buying 2 of everything, but that is one option that perhaps super collectors might consider. Maybe I'm a bit nostalgic, but remembering back to my own childhood and having to have the parents step in and divide the time equally between my sisters and I regarding who got to use the Atari and when always makes me smile. Luckily, once the excitement of the newness wore off, my sisters went back to socializing with friends. They would even have sleepovers where they would sit around and gossip while watching me beat some of these games. But back then you didn't beat Asteroids, you didn't beat Pole Position, you didn't beat Pac-Man. You got a higher score than your friends, and if you were lucky, you figured out a way to justify to your parents the insanely high cost and insane wait time involved in trying to take an actual photograph of the screen somehow. I can't tell you how happy I was to finally flip the scoreboard on Asteroids. This is why, for me personally, physical copies are everything. With one glance over at my bookshelf, I'm flooded with the happy childhood memories of gaming. I can't get that same feeling when booting up a USB loaded to the brim. So the physical versus digital copy debate brings us to which of the 2 systems will be right for you. If 99% of your games are online, then grab the digital-only version, as long as your internet connection is not an issue. As for me, I have a lot of physical games, so I'll be getting the version with the disk drive. It's not as symmetrical as the digital version, but I like that it isn't. In nature, nothing is 100% symmetrical. So for me, the disk drive version reflects that not everything in the world has to be perfect. This is a huge turning point in gaming. The fact that there is now going to be a digital-only console means that Sony has finally noticed a complete sea change in gaming. Avid collectors with a ton of games and movies will probably get the disk drive version. That being said, I have very physical PS4 games. Each time a newer system is released, the amount of physical copies for that game system goes way down, at least in my own modest collection. I have a ton of PS2 games, a few dozen PS3 games, and the amount of PS4 games in physical form I can count on one hand. What does this mean? It means that digital-only versions of games are becoming the new norm, and that eventually physical copies of games are going to skyrocket in value, as long as there will still be systems to play them on. For people like me, we will always have those physical copies and will always need the hardware to play them. Who knows, maybe eventually people will be able to scan the unique barcodes of their physical copies as a proof of purchase, if you will, enabling us to receive the digital equivalents at no extra charge. If Sony expects us all to rebuy digital versions of our entire libraries, they're dreaming, at least for now. This is amazing, though. More and more of us are switching to digital-only collections, and I think that's great. Not only for the environment, but also for our basements. No longer will die-hard collectors need to devote an entire room to storing and displaying their game collections, like some dystopian nouveau library that contains 0 actual books. So I think it's fair to say that the version with the disk drive is going to be worth more than the digital-only version, based simply on the fact that it contains additional hardware. As to what those individual prices are going to be, we first have to remember back to how much the original systems released for. The PlayStation released for $299. At the time, it was up against the Sega Saturn, which dropped for $399. With just a quick research Googling, one can immediately learn that the best-selling game for the original PlayStation was a driving game in Gran Turismo. This sold over 10 million copies, and it's why I was excited to hear that they revealed Gran Turismo 7 will be making its way to the PS5. This is going to be amazing. The PlayStation 2 released for the exact same price as the PlayStation at $299, and the best-selling game for that system was also a driving game, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which is not only the highest-selling game on the PS2, but one of the highest-selling games ever of all time at over 27 million copies. This is because, in my opinion, the PS2 is one of the greatest consoles of all time. Sony actually partnered with the then behemoth Nintendo to release a joint venture called, wait for it, the SNES PlayStation. The facts are all over the place with who did what, but basically the two companies decided to part ways, but their names stuck. Nintendo kept the SNES name because they had already invested a ton of infrastructure and it wasn't economically feasible to change millions of game packaging. In a stroke of genius, they simply changed the word Sony for Super, and the Sony Nintendo Entertainment System became the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and the rest, as they say, is history. Sony was also allowed to keep the name they were going to use, which was the PlayStation, as the original system could play Famicom cartridges as well as discs. Discs and memory cards propelled Sony into the number one spot because up to that point, you couldn't really save your progress. And Nintendo tried to catch up by revealing external components that allowed for saving, like 3.5-inch floppy drives and putting little memory cards with batteries in them into the cartridges themselves, but it was already too late. Now, the Super Nintendo is still an amazing system. I have one and play it all the time. Nothing beats original Super Mario Kart. After the wildly overwhelming success of the PlayStation 2, Sony released the PlayStation 3 in 2006. This is known as Sony's least successful system, based mainly, as you may have guessed, on the price. It was a whopping $499 for the standard, or an insane $599 for the 60GB version at launch. Just for consistency and comparison, the highest selling game for the PS3 was also a driving game and an installment from the GTA franchise. This time it was GTA 5 at over 21 million copies. This is a reflection of how many systems were out there. Don't get me wrong, people were still buying the system, as the numbers indicate, but nowhere near the PS2 or PS4. The sheer success of the PS2 and the incredible game library meant that people either kept playing their PS2 or made the switch to Microsoft at this time, which was a little cheaper and had a half-decent selection of games at that point. Enter the PS4 on November 15th, 2013, back at a reasonable initial price of $399 for the base console. Its best-selling game, you guessed it, a driving game. Same as the PS3 actually, GTA 5. Now, obviously, you cannot play PS3 games on a PS4, which meant that everyone had to go back out and buy the PS4 versions of all their games, which promised far superior graphics as well as a more comprehensive online experience. And this is right around the time where the online store started to become a thing, so yeah, that's where the digital-only collections come from. It is also a Blu-ray player and was not released without a disc drive, even though the majority of younger gamers may have entirely digital games libraries and only use the disc drive, if at all, for when, I don't know, the parents come over for dinner with an old DVD. So based on the original release costs of all these previous systems, what is the price that I personally think the PS5 will be? I have no idea. And I think, again, Sony may be testing the waters here, letting the gaming community speculate on their own for a while to see what a reasonable price may be, with Sony trolling the most popular gamers online. Ultimately, for the die-hard fans, they will pay whatever Sony wants, but for you and me, we are kind of at the mercy of rich executives here. The digital-only version will be cheaper than the one that comes with a disc drive, or at least it should be, as it obviously costs more for that added hardware. And again, Sony made no mention of whether or not it will be able to play PS1 and PS2 games. All systems can play PS1 games, and it has been possible to play digital PS2 games on the PS4 from a tab located in the PlayStation Store PS2 on PS4. And I know there's a million different software mods and hacks out there that let you play PS2 discs on a PS4, but I'm not getting into that side of the world at all. We're just talking about bone stock equipment here. So with that in mind, I'm guessing that there will be a $50 difference between the two systems. What this means in reality is probably that there will actually be a $129 difference. I'm guessing $499 for the digital-only version and up to potentially $649 for the version with the optical drive. Hopefully I'm wrong and the disk drive version will drop at $549, but only time will tell. Either way, I hope you're as excited as I am for this release. And obviously, once it does finally drop, I'll do a full, more comprehensive review where I'll not only compare the systems to each other, but also to the PS4 and PS4 Pro. Keep everything crossed that the price won't be way out of left field. Ultimately, whether companies sell footwear, vacuums, cheeseburgers, or gaming consoles, businesses exist for the exact same reason. They got to get that cheddar, people. Well, that's about it for me. Thank you very much for watching this video, and please consider subscribing for more content like this, and leave a like. Okay, guys, take care. See you in the next one. This has been Stella Jimenez, also known as the Breakfast of Champions, obviously. And you too, be awesome.